Welcome to CareyBrosPros, the podcast for construction pros by construction pros. Now, here are James and Morris Carey.
It's time for another edition of CareyBrosPros, and in this one, we're talking stucco. What should professionals know about using stucco, safety issues, and what projects does it work best on? So let's get this party started. Hi, I'm Morris.
And I'm James, and our guest for this segment is the Executive Director for the Stucco Manufacturers Association, and he's the Editorial Director for Walls and Ceilings magazine. He is Mark Fowler. Mark, welcome to CareyBrosPros.
Hi, guys. Thank you.
For our friends that don't know, what is the Stucco Manufacturers Association?
Yeah, Stucco Manufacturers Association is a group of, it started out originally just as stucco manufacturers, but it's expanded on to being dealers and contractors and consultants in the stucco industry. And so we're made up of a wide group of people. We were formed in 1957. We're a nonprofit trade association, and we work to promote stucco, provide education and training on stucco. We do architectural classes. So pretty much if it's stucco, we're about it.
Love it.
Mark, what makes stucco unique, compared to other claddings?
I think there's a few things that make it unique. One, it's probably one of the few materials that's actually made on site, where most products we think of as being delivered and then just being installed, whether it be like sheet materials or goods like that, where stucco is actually blended on site. So that makes it a little bit unique. It also gives it the flexibility that you can form it and shape it. You can do round surfaces with it. You can form it and shape it to whatever you want. The textures are pretty much just limited to your imagination. I mean, of course, we know that most people know sand finishes and maybe some of the lace textures, but there's been some pretty amazing textures that are done that way. And then I think the thing that makes it's a fire-rated material also. Besides just being non-combustible, it actually has been in the fire code, building codes since the inception of the code, as 7/8 inch thick. It gives you a 1-hour fire-rated membrane for your wall. And then the maintenance on it. When it's done right and done correctly, it's really going to just last the life of the building with very, very little maintenance.
I have to tell you something before we go on about this fire rating, and I just want to interject this because it has to do with your comment. James and I went to the firestorm area in Oakland after 3,000 houses burned down, and we were driven in a panel delivery truck with no windows in the back, which was where we were sitting. And when we got to the site and when the truck van stopped, I slid the door open, and as I gazed out over the area, it looked like an atomic bomb had hit. All I saw were a couple of chimneys standing and one house. One house was standing as far as I could see, in 360 degrees, one house. And it was finished with a tile roof and stucco. Everything around it melted. So I don't know what this 1-hour rating is, but if you ask me, it's a 1-hour rating in a 2,800 degree fire.
Yes. No, that's a great story. And actually, I think there was a paper published with that exact house used as an example up in the Oakland fires. I remember that. So Thank you for pointing that out. Yes, and That is true. That's one thing about stucco that I know a lot of designers like, is they know that they can get that fire rating without having to add an extra layer of sheeting. And if you add sheeting, you can get 2-hour fire rating.
Yes.
Wow. Okay, Mark, there's something called an EIF. That's EIF. There's cement, and there's hard coat stucco. Please explain the difference and which of those, in your opinion, is the best?
Okay, that's a great question. And with stucco, especially, people see something and they go, well, it's stucco. And I go, well, it may or it may not be. And I've come down to, the industry has kind of come up with what we think there's basically 5 types of stucco or stucco-like systems. The first one would be the real stucco, which we call 3-coat stucco or hard coat stucco. It's been in the code since the inception of the code. It's 3 coats of cement applied to a thickness of 3/4 of an inch to 1 inch thick over a metal reinforcement, which we refer to as lath, and then a weather-resistive barrier. So that's your traditional stucco. The EIFS, which stands for Exterior Insulated Finish Systems, came out of Europe, and that's a insulation board that's been applied with a continuous continuous layer of fiberglass mesh over that and a reinforcing base material, and then an acrylic finish on top of that. And that's been popular for quite a few years. It's a nice system. Now they have drainage system EIFS also. The other systems that we see more on the West Coast, I would say, is a one-coat stucco system. And one-coat stucco is a lot like a conventional stucco, except it's a little thinner because instead of having 3 coats of scratch and brown, 3/4 to 1 inch thick, you're getting one coat of base at 3/8 to 1/2 inch, but it's over a lath also. And one coats usually in the West are done over foam sheathing. And then the other two, the last two systems we call our direct applied systems. And those are systems that the direct applied system is a panelized sheathing where you just treat the joints and put a coating over it. Those don't typically work too well, and we try to steer people away from them unless you're doing on a ceiling. On a soffit, we think they're fine for soffits, but what happens to those is the joints tend to want to show through. And the newest system that's kind of out there now that we're hearing a lot about is cement board systems. And cement board systems are kind of the same idea as the direct applied system, but you have a sheathing, and then you put a cement board over it, and you offset the joints. That makes it so it works better because with the offset of the joints, you get a stronger system, and then they put a continuous mesh over the system, and then you put an acrylic finish on it. You see those systems used in areas where I would say stucco is not so popular, and the reason for that is the cost. It's expensive in materials, but you don't need a lot of plasters. You just need one good trowel guy can do that, whereas going back to the conventional stucco, which is what we're used to in the Southwest, you need plasters. And when you asked which one is the best, I think it really kind of depends on what you want. I don't think there's one product is the answer for all. Of course, I represent the stucco industry, but our manufacturers also do EIFS and the other systems. Yeah. I think you have to kind of look at which, what you're looking for. If it's insulation, the EIFS systems are really good. There's for high abuse, a real stucco, hard coat stucco is best. You sort of have to, I think it's the architect has to sort of weigh the pros and cons of each system, and then they have to sort of pick and choose which one is best for that building.
Of course, the big thing that we think about as builders is how to prevent stucco cracks. And now I'm in a home that I purchased from a friend who was a builder, and the home is covered with cracks. It's a Santa Barbara finish. It's a beautiful finish, but there are cracks everywhere. Now, I just made peace with that. And I said, it's the nature of the beast. And I've been to Europe. I've been to Italy, different parts of the world, Greece, and all of those old buildings are covered with cracks. So I just look at my Tuscan-style home and say, you know what? It's just vintage Italy, whatever. But how do you, as a builder, what are the things that you can do to prevent stucco from cracking? Or what are some of the mistakes that builders make that cause stucco to crack?
Those are great questions. I'll tell you, it starts with, and this actually is another reason why I think plastering contractors have sometimes a little more difficulty in some other regions of the country, because I've actually was a plastering contractor in Southern California, and then I did move up to other areas in the north and did plastering up there. And some of it is, and that starts with the idea of what the builder can do. A lot of it is sheathing. The wood-based sheathing, you want to have your sheathing gapped, because what happens when you put the building paper on and then you put your cement on, it's wet. And building paper is not meant to be waterproof. It's weatherproof. So vapor does travel through it. So if you've got wood-based sheathing underneath, what happens is that wood-based sheathing, if it's butt up real tight, will expand and swell. As it's slowly starting to swell, the plaster's just been put on, it's curing and trying to set, and guess what happens? That fresh plaster can crack. That would be one thing a builder can do, is make sure he spaces the sheathing, try to keep vibrations down, don't pound on the inside of the wall when the outside's got fresh stucco on it. The plasterer should use proper mixture ratios. I've seen a lot of where it's get too rich a cement, or they use, I don't think too much sand has really been such an issue, but too much water, too much sand, and that can make it so you have more shrinkage, because it's the cement that actually is shrinking. Another practice that I would recommend to builders to watch for, and it's the floating of the brown coat. That's the second, the base coat. You put your scratch coat on, they scratch it, which is why they call it score it to scratch it. When they put the brown coat on, they level it off. And then what you're supposed to do, and ASTM tells you to do this, after the sufficient moisture leaves the system, it's not set or anything like that. It's just as it loses a little bit of moisture, you hard float it. And you're supposed to take a hard, like wood shingle, cork, or a hard neoprene float, and you float it. What that does is it compacts and densifies it. It does two things. It adds water resistance, and it helps reduce cracking. A bad practice that I've seen going on is guys are taking sponge floats because it's faster, and they come along and just lightly hit it with a sponge float and say, it looks good, it's floated, but you didn't compact and densify it. So that's a problem. If you compact and densify it, you use the right materials, you look at the lumber, make sure it's dry, you're putting on, do all that, you should really only have minimal cracking. Now, the good news is the newest product that we have out there that can really help cracking, and it's funny because when you mentioned the Santa Barbara finish, and for your listeners, that's a smooth trowel finish called Santa Barbara because it has that mission-type look to it, or we call cat faces. Yeah. And I agree with you. I love that finish.
I do too,
and I think it looks wonderful.
I have a really, really important issue along with this cracking.
Okay.
Let's say that the plaster used too much water or too much cement, and the house ends up looking like a spider web. Is there any way to repair that?
Yes, and that actually, because I was thinking about your house, what you were talking about having cracks, and you're right. You should only have a few hairline cracks. We just know that's going to happen. But if it was cracked badly,
yes,
and assuming it's still hard and solid and attached to that,
it is
to the wall and to the lath, you can take a base coat and mesh and go over it. And if you go to the Stucco Manufacturers website, there's actually a video on the website called Crack Reduction System. And what they'll do is you can trowel a skim coat over the plaster, and then they trowel a fiberglass mesh into that polymer-enriched skim coat and trowel it down, and then put a new finish on top of it. And that has done an amazing job of making stucco, I can't say absolutely crack-free because you could still get a crack here and there, but it really, really reduces it. And this explains why a lot of people are now driving around seeing a smooth trowel Santa Barbara building going, there's no cracks in it. How'd they do that? Well, I can tell you they probably put a base and mesh system over it and troweled it down. It does add some cost, but it does get rid of those cracks, and they won't come through.
Wow, but great information. Okay.
Oh, I tell you.
Stucco is porous. We know that. And we know that stucco can be put on with a color coat, which means that the finish color is in the finish of the plaster. Is it important to paint stucco even if a color coat has been applied? Is there a sealer that needs to be applied? What is the recommended practice for our listeners?
You know, you don't need to seal stucco. If the materials are mixed properly and hard floated like that, and like you said, you can put a color coat is what we refer to the West as a cementitious, eighth-inch cementitious finish, or a lot of people are using the acrylic finishes are real popular now, which are, a polymer-enriched paint basically with sand, and they go over that. And they kind of seal it, but people think that it's waterproof, that's water, but it's not. The stucco itself, it's funny, I would say it's not really porous. It's more absorptive. When you throw water at it, it will absorb water. But if it's done correctly, it's hard to get water to go through it without a crack or an opening. And what happens is you do not have to seal stucco. If it's properly done, it doesn't have to be sealed. Now, what can happen is that a lot of people put elastomeric or rubberized coatings on them to seal it, and usually they're doing that because there's been a leak somewhere. And the leaks usually are from terminations where the stucco terminates to a window or at control joints and water's getting in. And the problem with using an elastomeric to seal it, because it's probably not going through the surface of the stucco. If you kind of were really to go back and do water tests, you'd find out it's coming in from all these other little areas. So what happens is they put this sealer, like an elastomeric coating over the whole thing. It seals everything up. And this, I'm just going to tell you, I've been through this for many years, and it's always the same answer. I say, so it worked really well. And they'll say, yeah, it worked great. And now what's wrong? Well, it's worse. And well, what happened is that seal failed somewhere. Wherever that conduit of water was getting in, all of a sudden that elastomeric gave way in that one spot, and now the water's getting in and really has nowhere to get out.
I'll be darned.
And that can be a problem.
Oh,
so that's why
I love
try
that.
to tell people with elastomerics, I do not like to see, and I think the industry stays with that too. We don't like to see them use those sealers or coatings to try to keep water out because it doesn't need to. It's good for cracking.